Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. On today's show, I'm talking with James Chartres, and welcome back to the show, James. You were a guest way back in February of 2017. I looked that up. That was episode 10.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You were an early one, and nothing has changed since then, right?
Quite a lot has changed. Thanks for having me back on the show. I appreciate it. Yeah, a lot have changed in my life. I just had a daughter, and then my racing. Thank you very much. Yeah, my wife did most of the work, obviously. And then my racing's changed a fair bit since. Wow, that's quite a while ago.
Yeah, so three years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
You've been racing still Spec Racer Ford for the past 3 years.
Yeah, so I upgraded to the Gen 3, what was it, 2018, so since then.
So 18 and 19 you ran the Gen 3?
Yeah. So the runoffs were at Sonoma on the West Coast for the 2018, so I upgraded the car then to run the runoffs. So.
And just for people that don't know, what's the difference? What is a Gen 3 and how does that all work? What's the difference?
Yeah, it's basically the same car and suspension. The motor is a newer motor, so it loses about 110 pounds and it gains about 35 or so horsepower. So the car drives a bit differently, but in the corners, the suspension is pretty much the same. The lightness helps, of course, but the horsepower is different. So you can't just jam the throttle like you used to in the Gen 2. So
what difference does that make it in lap time? Let's say at a place like Sonoma.
Probably 3 seconds or so, 2 to 3 seconds, I'd say.
And the SRF is still as competitive as always, though.
Yeah, always competitive. Yeah, the runoffs was interesting because the top 10 or so, are within hundredths to tenths of a second of each other. So it's really a fun field to run in. So.
How many cars started the runoffs at Sonoma? How many SRFs?
That's a good question. I think it was maybe 47, but I know I've been in a race there that was 60, and I don't know if that was the runoffs or a different race. So,
yeah. And tell everybody how you did in that race.
Oh, so I had a decent start for the first few corners, and then I went off course to avoid getting hit. Well, I got hit and went off course trying to avoid getting hit more. And so I spent the rest of the race catching pretty much back up to where I had started. And then I managed to make my way up a little bit further through the field due to some attrition and then also just, some hard work. So
that's cool. That was your first runoffs, right?
Yeah, that was my first one. So a little bit different. Just in terms of the format, just because it's like a week-long format kind of thing with the test days and stuff. But and it's a winner-takes-all race, so it's just a single race that culminates. It's kind of interesting, It's not like a race weekend where you have multiple races, and qualifying sessions. So
yeah. Well, I know last year following you and your kind of your experience and watching what you were doing last year. You seem to make a fairly big jump again in your performance last year. And I'd love to kind of talk to you about that. I mean, you just seem like you're consistently running faster lap times. I'd see posts about, new personal lap record, new best finishing position, all of those things. And, again, in Spec Racer Ford, that's really tough to do. It seems like the drivers that seem to win in classes like that, they're drivers that have been doing that series for a long time. So to be able to kind of move up against them, I know that's not easy. So I'd love to spend a little time in this podcast talking to you about, kind of dive in there, what techniques, practice approach, car setup. I mean, everything. Just if you don't mind, and you don't need to give away the secret, the trick stuff, but tell us a little bit about how you made some improvements this past year. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm pretty open in my stuff, so I give a lot of stuff away on my website and stuff. So,
and just before we go on, I mean, your website is just a great resource, and I'd say, thank you because you write articles for Speed Secrets Weekly as well, and you are kind of one of those drivers that I think I suspect your attitude is I can give you some information, but you're still the one that has to go and use it. And
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess kind of going back to the improvements, I mean, driving technique wise, what were some of the differences between this past year and years in the past, would you say?
Yeah, last year was really good for me. Like you said, almost every race weekend I went out, I was setting new personal best lap times, moving up the field. I think, the biggest single difference that probably made it for me was confidence. Confidence is a funny thing because once you get some, then it's a lot easier to get some more. But if you don't have any, it's kind of hard to get. So, I think really.
And where did the confidence come from?
Well, I think it was more trying to just believe in my skills and abilities. I think it was, the 2018, you and I did a test day together. That really helped because I saw how you coached. The day was really good, but it was really taking away like how you coached to use that on myself. That really helped a lot.
Uh-huh.
You did that self-coaching webinar, which, gave me a whole bunch of questions, but I think I was more disciplined with myself. It's very easy to get out of the car, look at your data and think about your lap times, but not really be like super hard on yourself or analytical about where you were losing time. And, you can get out of the car and be really hard on yourself and just be like, man, I'm just not braking right for this corner, instead of focusing on what you can do to improve it. So I think that helped a lot. And then, I really felt like my car control clicked and I had the confidence, to be able to overdrive the car a little bit more. Not crazy, but like enough to be able to catch it if I know. Like, so I could drive it, say 3 to 5 miles per hour more in a corner and still know I can catch it and not, go flying off the track or hurt myself or hurt the car or something like that, So I had more confidence in being able to push the car and therefore my driving a little bit more. That really helped. And then, as you start setting, better times, you start getting more and more confidence, you start qualifying well, you start hitting, the top of the timesheets on some of the test sessions and stuff, that really helped.
So when you start running faster, you start running with different drivers too. Did that make a difference?
Yeah, it does. And, I always call them the fast guys, guys and girls, but the fast ones, and then, I think it was partway through the year, someone referred to me as one of the fast ones. So that was a funny feeling because, I've always looked up to the fast ones. Like on our region, we have a lot of ex-national champions or people that have been running the class for 10, 15 years. So, they're real fast. And so being able to run with them was good. And then the other thing is when you're running with them and you can see that, hey, I'm actually doing these 3 corners faster and better than that guy, but I'm losing out on these 2 or 3 corners, then I know which corners I need to work on.
Yeah, so I'm sure that somebody calling you one of the fast ones, again, that builds your confidence too. So it's kind of that you get a little confidence, you get a better result. Somebody refers to you as faster, you get a little more confidence, you push a little harder, and it kind of builds on itself.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of, it's good advice for somebody. It's hard to do in practice.
Yeah.
I think the biggest, probably switch in my mind was, talking to you and talking to some other of the drivers, it was just like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen, if you drive just a little bit faster, you're probably going to catch the car or have to back off halfway through the corner, or you might kill your exit speed or whatever. But as long as you have the car skills to be able to catch the car and know what you're doing, you can push that a little bit more and you're not going to go flying off and you're not going to break the car and damage the car, which was always, I think, holding me back because I work on my car a lot. So I'm like fixing it between sessions, which is, so I don't want to damage the car. But there's a fine balance there in overdriving the car just a little bit versus, not pushing it all and just, kind of cruising or coasting at your comfort level.
Yeah, it's kind of easy to get into that mode of, I mean, you're driving at the limit, but you're not pushing beyond it at all, right? And it does feel comfortable, and you feel like, wow, I'm driving this thing well. But it's not until you kind of go over that limit and then bring it back a little bit. It's almost like you're on the other side of the limit, but at the limit. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and it's like knowing when you're over that, like you feel the tire scrubbing, or and you're losing speed, or you feel it step out just a little bit, and you've got to like do that catch. Or I think the biggest difference, and if I was to look at my lap times, was corner entry. I had a very bad habit, and I think I've talked about this in maybe one of the Speed Secrets or on my website, was I would overslow the car and then get on the full throttle and then drive the corner. And I was like, well, that's as fast as I can go because, I got to full throttle early and I got out of the corner,
Yeah.
But when you look at the data compared to another guy I was looking at, I could see that there's just this small section at the end of the braking zone where I would lose like 2 to 3 miles per hour, but then I would gain it back up, getting to the throttle earlier. But that little bit of time, that cost me like 1/10 of a second or 2/10 of a second. And then I did that like 6 or 7 times a lap.
Yeah.
I lost a second. And that was my second. So how do I find that second is I find the tenths. Yeah. And so like working on my corner entry speed was key for last season, just looking at the data.
Well, and I don't know how sensitive a Spec Racer Ford is to that whole kind of the platform change, I call it. And it's that, if you overslow by 2 miles an hour, your traction sensing kind of your butt meter, says, I got some grip. So you go to the throttle. Now you've caused a lot of weight transfer, probably more. Well, you cause more weight transfer to the rear than you normally would if you'd carried 2 miles an hour more into the corner. And now you've unloaded the front end, or you're kind of overpowering expecting too much from those rear tires from cornering and accelerating at the same time. So you end up with something where, now the car is sort of beyond its limit, but you caused that limit at 2 miles an hour lower than. Yeah.
There is some corners I found that, I had to do just a little bit of a pause before I could get to full throttle. So I get to full throttle just a little bit later than I normally would.
Yeah.
But because I was entering faster, I had just that much more speed. And then over that distance, that caused me just that little bit extra, time drop. That was really useful. The other thing I did in the off season, I think it made a difference, but I think all of this stuff adds up, was I poured a custom foam seat insert, thanks to my partners at Butler Built, their racing seats. I poured a custom seat insert that perfectly fits me. And that made a huge difference the first time out on track. I felt like I could, and it may have just been a placebo thing, but I felt like I could really feel the car a lot different.
Well, if it was a placebo, then it's the same placebo that's worked for many other drivers, because every driver, you get a seat that fits you and holds you and connects you to the car that much better. You end up going faster, whether it's a 10th or half a second. I know guys who have put a different seat in their car and gone a second quicker.
Yeah, I can believe that. Yep.
Yeah. One of the things that we worked on last year when we were, I guess that was actually 2018 when we were at Sonoma, was just the whole idea of kind of go and get messy.
Yeah.
I remember kind of watching you and going, wow, you're a very tidy driver. You're very smooth, and you are at the limit, but you're not ever going over it. And, I can remember encouraging you, go get messy. You'll bring the car back. I don't know whether I ever caused you to cause any damage or not, so I apologize for that right now.
I think most of my damage in the past couple of seasons have been myself positioning the car wrong or a competitor helping me along the way. I don't think it's from your coaching there, Ross. But yeah, I think that was a big big change is to, I'm an engineer, so I'm very analytical about things. And sometimes, I was getting frustrated with myself because I knew I could drive better or that my performance wasn't where I wanted it to be. And I was kind of putting pressure on myself. So my wife said to me, just go have fun, just go. You're doing this for fun. Like you're getting all stressed and, trying to frustrated with yourself, but you're paying a lot of money to go have fun. So for the test sessions and the qualifying, I was very analytical, went through my data and, made all my notes and stuff and did all that. But for the races, I just went to race and just have fun, And so I think that helped.
And did you have some kind of a trigger for you to get there? Because I know, I think what you just said is absolutely, it is so critical. I think the very best drivers in the world have that ability to be very analytical up to a certain point and then kind of just turn their brain off, trust themselves to drive. And it sounds like that's what you did. Was there a specific trigger that helped you with that? Or was it just kind of just accepting, just let it go kind of thing?
Yeah, I wasn't using like a mental imagery trigger for that one. I have a couple other triggers I use, but it was more just like, I don't know, before on pre-grid or just before the race, I wasn't as nervous or as, worked up on myself of like, okay, I've got to get into 10th, I got to make up 4 or 5 positions because I really should be in, I think I'm fast enough, my test session was fast enough that I should have been qualified in 8th, but I'm back here in 14th or 12th or whatever it is, and so I think it was just not being hard on myself in pre-grid and just saying like, all right, this is the whole fun of the race is racing with other people and passing cars, so just all right, let's get the next one, let's pass the next one, all right, who's next, let's go and see if we can catch him.
So it sounds like you need to listen to your wife more often.
Yeah. I don't think she will not disagree with that statement for sure. So, no, she's been really great help and very supportive through the whole thing. So I've really appreciated her. She is often wiser, than I probably give her credit for. But often on a race weekend, it can be a distraction sometimes. Having friends and family around, but it often really helps to have them around and just kind of ground you. I'm driving out there to try and win $10 plastic trophies. I'm not there's not really a large amount of money on the line other than what I'm spending. So
going the wrong direction, right?
yeah
So. Well, it's interesting because I've seen that kind of thing before where, and I'm not saying your wife doesn't know a lot about racing, I'm sure she's got a pretty good understanding of it, but I've seen drivers who have, a friend, a spouse, or somebody come to the track who knows absolutely nothing. It's the first time they've ever been to a track in their life. And they just ask one question, like, why you look smoother than the other drivers, or, why do you drive over there when everybody else drives over there? Like something like that. And it's some simple little thing, innocent kind of a comment, and it makes a huge difference with a driver. So it's interesting that how that works. And I think sometimes it's just the awareness of, boy, you look really uptight and tense. Yeah. Oh, maybe that's a cue.
Yeah. I think, probably don't give it enough credit, but being comfortable in the car and trying to enjoy yourself probably, makes for you a more relaxed driver, and you're less tense and you can probably feel what's going on. So, all these little things probably added up to help, but there's lots of things I changed, and I've gotten better at, but some of it comes naturally with time. It's not always going to work for every driver. I think that's probably like why you get such a kick out of coaching and things like that. Is like different drivers are at different points, track notes, for instance, when you first start out taking track notes, it's kind of hard and you're not sure what you'd be taking track notes about, and then later on you kind of work out, okay, I got to take this is why I'm taking track notes, and I'm taking more notes. And then I think, the last few years I've been taking track notes, not for the weekend, so I take all my normal track notes for that weekend, but I've been taking track notes for the month later when I'm going to come back to the track. So I have to be able to read those notes and understand them a month from now without ever opening them up before, and so a big difference there was, things like, I used to make notes like, brake later for turn 5, well, brake later than what,
Right.
or like brake harder, harder than what, and so I have been working on an article. It should be out when this comes out, but on, taking better track notes and how to take them with context, and that really helped me.
Well, can you share so rather than writing down brake later or brake harder, what would you write down now differently?
So like for turn 5, say at Laguna, it's an important corner, heading up the hill before you go. So like, I'd say, it's an 8 pedal at this point, and then, how smooth my hands need to be, on a scale of 1 to 5, is it a quick jerk of the wheel, or is it, a smooth rolling of the wheel? I'd also reference where, I'm doing throttle pickup with respect to the apex, and then also knowing that corner is, it's on camber. So you kind of, the way you ride that corner in the apex, you can ride that apex curbing up because the corner is going to catch you. So you can carry more speed than you think you can because of just the way the track's shaped there, versus say like, turn 4, which is a lot flatter and it doesn't have that camber at Laguna, so you've got to be careful there. Turn 4 also tends to be dusty, and so, but turn 5 tends to clear itself. So things like that.
I love turn 5 at Laguna in corners like that. I like corners where when you turn in and as you're heading towards the apex, you think, "Oh my God, I'm going to die."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the car hits the hill and the banking, and it goes, ugh, and it sticks, and you go, "Oh, that wasn't so bad after all." I just love that because there's that level of trust. It's, to me, it's a little bit like driving in the rain where you're going to trust that, okay, the car's going to slide, it's going to slide, it's going to slide. We're going to get to that sort of that rim around the outside where the track has more grip, and the car will grip there, and away we go again. It's almost like we hit a little berm or something, but it's having that trust that it's going to do it, and just those corners are like that. Last corner coming on the front straight at Watkins Glen 12. Is like that a little bit. You kind of turn in and you think, well, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And then partway through the corner, you go, oh, the car is stuck now. I could have carried more speed. Yeah.
Yeah. There's many a time I've gone through turn 5 and gone, man, I could have gone faster. So
it kind of, rarely do you go through there and go, yep, I nailed it. You always think you left something on the table, that one. Yeah.
So, and that pays big rewards all the way up the hill there. So, especially in our cars that are, probably under horsepowered for the weight. So.
Yeah. What about car setup and just your prep and things like that? Because you do it all. I mean, and I know you have some. I think you have some help at times, but it's your baby, right?
Yeah, I mean, Rick at CSR Performance is really good. He helps me, stores the car for me. And then, if I get busy with work, he'll take care of things, but, I keep the setup sheets and we talk about things. I tried a bunch of things last year, and the year before, there's a certain bit of playing with the setup that I do, and then, I'm not sure I'm the best setup driver or anything, I can tell you if it's better. I can't tell you why it's better, but it can tell you if it's better. And I've just started to get to the point where it's like, okay, I need to change this on the front end because this is what's happening with the car, or I need to change the rear because, so, things like, just, going a couple clicks softer on all four shocks just to see if it makes a difference on a test day. It's something really quickly you could do between sessions, which is key for me because, I can't really swap out spring rates in our class, and I can't really, disassemble the whole suspension between a session because I just don't have the time. Mm-hmm. So, it's focusing on the things I can change. Sway bar changes are quick, shock quick changes, but, to change the camber or whatever, or major changes of caster, which also affect toe and camber, it's harder to do. So before weekend, I'd try and set up the car and then try and tweak the known setup for it. So I have my baseline, and then I would do a major change in the shop. So I have I add more camber, or I add more caster or something like that, and then that weekend I could only change what limit parameters based on what I have. I also kind of worked out, I'm an engineer, I kind of worked out how many turns the lower rod end, the lower hind joint, adds up to how much camber change in our tires.
Yeah.
So I know like a half turn is like a 0.15 degrees of camber. So I know if I want to go, a little bit of camber, I can quickly do that adjustment and then just check the toe, not to give away all my secrets, but I was surprised at how much of a difference toe made to turn in ability for the car. Especially on, so we drive like Laguna, Sonoma, and Thunderhill. Those are predominantly our tracks. And so Thunderhill, you have a lot of corners that are, sweeping corners, and it's not a lot of, it's less of a rhythm track because it's interrupted by a lot of straights. Uh-huh. So that track doesn't seem to reward certain setups, whereas like Sonoma and Laguna, they're kind of more rhythmy tracks. By the time you finish with one corner, you're having to set up for the next corner a lot. And so that I found that those tracks changed how they rewarded driving. So on setups, so like, different changes in toe, different changes in the shocks, just it was more rewarding because you're not spending a lot of the time with the wheel straight. So
interesting. As you were talking about making those changes in the shop, I think, the top IndyCar teams, top prototype car teams in IMSA and stuff like that, one of the very first things they do with their cars when they get them is in the shop, they do a baseline setup, and then they just make all those changes. And so now when they're in pit lane, they know that, if they want, 0.2 more negative camber, they know it's, well, if it's not a shim, it's one turn or half a turn or whatever.
Yeah.
They've been through all of that, and they know that when they do that, that changes the toe that much. So they make that adjustment, half a flat on the thing. So they've run through all of those changes at the shop before they ever get to the track. So now, they almost don't ever have to even check the alignment setup when they're at the track because they've run through it all. Now they'll do a check every now and then throughout the weekend. But so you're doing the exact same thing those top teams are doing. And it's a whole lot easier to do it in the shop when you've got time and, you're comfortable and you've got proper lighting and all of that kind of stuff, right? Rather than trying to do it underneath your canopy in the pouring rain.
Yeah. Well, or, it's hot out and I'm tired and I've been running all day for the test day. And then the next day, the last thing I want to do is crawl around under the car, so. Yeah. So it made a difference. I'm not sure that I have the best setup out there, or I really have the tires just in the sweet spot. But just being able to make a couple of changes when I was like, that didn't really feel right, or I really wish I could turn in more, and then I would just make a couple of changes and I'd be like, all right, that's better. So yeah.
So I'm curious with Spec Racer Ford. The way you turn the steering wheel, would you say that you generally turn the steering wheel the same depending on, and taking the example of Laguna Seca, you come down into turn 2, you come to 3, which is kind of a fairly constant radius kind of thing. Turn 4, this big long sweeper, and then 5, like you said, it's a little different. Like, do you think the way you turn in, is it a crisp turn in? Is it kind of a progressive kind of thing? Do you tighten the wheel up as you get into the corner? Is there anything that you notice as a driver? I just curious because I've been really thinking a lot about not just, we spend a lot of time thinking about where the turn-in point is for a corner, but not a lot about, well, am I turning in progressively at a constant rate? Am I kind of more of a digressive kind of a thing? How would you say your steering input is? And maybe the bigger question is just, do you even pay attention to that?
No, I know. I actually last year I paid a lot of attention to that, so it's interesting you ask.
Yeah.
So turn 2 is very different than say like 3 or 4. Like turn 2, just the hairpin there. You can either double apex it or run out a little bit, give up the first apex. Depends on qualifying or race. I'd say turn 11 is huge difference. The last one there, I tend to chuck the car a lot more so I can get it pointed straighter, quicker, and to full throttle quicker.
So more of a real quick turn of the steering wheel.
I'm probably yanking the wheel more than I should, but it seems to be working.
Yeah.
I'd say turn 9 just after the corkscrew is real gradual. You really don't want to upset that car, and I always describe it as, I'm in a fighter plane and I'm like dive bombing to the left down that turn. That's kind of how I think about it. And
that's cool.
I try to get, I see a lot of drivers go out wide and then turn in sharper. And so I don't really like that. I like to do more of a sweeping arc because then I know the loading of the car is not changing. If I tighten it up, the loading of my car is changing more. And so now I'm trying to do, if I'm tightening up through that corner, I'm like, decreasing the radius of that turn, so like my cornering capacity of the car is probably decreasing as well. So, whereas if I can do a longer, smoother arc, I know where the car is going to run out there on that exit. Mm-hmm. Better. That's just how it works for me. Different people do it different ways, and I've seen people do it fast both ways. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think about it as some corners they reward kind of that crisp turn in, some reward more of a bend it in kind of I think turn 9 you're talking about. It sounds to me like to me I would say you're bending the car into the corner, and then some corners you can kind of turn in and then put a little more steering in the middle of the corner, and kind of just.
Yeah, I mean, turn 3 is huge at Laguna for that because that to me of all the turns is the one that changes its grip level the most. It's the one that will flood if it's raining there, and so that changes a lot, and it's also the one that probably gets most of the dirt and dust.
Yep.
And so every time I go through turn 3, I do my normal turn in, but I'm always having to do a little extra turn or whatever just to adjust to what's happening,
I'm curious, does your car typically understeer through there?
Oh, yeah, it plows. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, most people's do, yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, if your car doesn't understeer in turn 3 at Laguna, it's going to be evil loose oversteer everywhere else. So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, I think I was maybe texting back and forth with Jeff Braun at one point about, I think he asked like, how was the setup or whatever. And I was like, still can't get it to turn in turn 3. So.
And his response was probably good.
Yeah. Nobody can.
Yeah. Welcome to the club. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
So I know that you are, you work for NASA, the space kind of NASA, not the racing NASA. Like you said, an engineer or something. I don't know exactly what it is, and it's probably some rocket science kind of stuff that you do. But how does your professional kind of approach to things, how does that impact your racing?
That's a good question. So the obvious one is checklists. So whenever we're assembling like spacecraft or we're doing tests and stuff, we have step-by-step checklists that we go through. So, for my racing, after each session, I have a checklist. Before each weekend, I have a checklist. I run through and check the car over. There's some pretty standard things on our cars. The lower jam nuts tend to have a tendency to come slightly loose sometimes. So you want to check those. You want to check the alternator belt often. Because it also drives the water pump on our cars, and you lose that and the car quickly gets hot. Ask me how I know.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah, fuel, how much fuel I'm putting in, just so I know what the weight's in the car, things like that. So I keep a running list, checklist. Most drivers do, though. If you really look at most drivers on a weekend, most of them have some checklist of some sort, that they're running through. That's probably a good one. I think the engineering and the data side of thing probably helps. I've spent some time looking at data sets in my career, and that, I kind of, when you first get a data system in a car, it's kind of confusing. What are you looking at? And, like squiggly lines, and, like, well, was it better or worse? I don't know. You can just, the lap time, what was the lap time? But I think, for some of your listeners, maybe some of the easy things to do that I picked up from others is, just don't grab your fastest lap every time. Grab your fastest and your slowest and see where the biggest difference was.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then you go, okay, that's maybe the corner I need to work on the most. Or grab, 5 of your faster laps and work out where the differences were. And maybe that's where you need to work on, One thing I was doing with my notes that I would do for the next month, I kept on my, my phone is an Apple, iPhone, and then I use the Apple laptop, so like my notes sync across them. I'd check my data and I'd work out, okay, this corner is where I'm losing this much time to my fastest time, or one of the fast guys had shared their data with me, and this is where I'm losing the time, or from the race I know I was losing time in turn 2 or whatever it may be, and so I'd go through them, prioritize, work out which corners I was losing the most time from, and then the next session out, that would be the corner I would focus on first. It's easy to do when you have a faster driver's data, or you have some of your own data that you were faster last time out or something like that. But if you're just starting out, often you can just ask people if they'll share their data. I know I've shared my data with a bunch of people new to the class and stuff, because most people at this level just want to race with each other. They're not looking to. I think once you start to get into the pointy end of the field, people stop sharing the data. That's pretty obvious, or they start sharing half truths. They're flat through a certain corner, but they also drag the brake with their left foot, but they don't tell you about the dragging the brake with the left foot kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if you're just starting out, those are some easy ways to start with data. That's kind of, that helps from the NASA stuff. I think, just being kind of methodical with my car check kind of helps a lot. When I'm doing a setup, there's a certain process to do, caster, camber, then check your toe. It just depends how your suspension is. Some of them influence each other, so you can't always dial it in, and sometimes you got to iterate. So things like that. I keep pretty rigorous notes on how much things are costing, and when I last did brake rotors and pads and things like that. So that's probably carrying over from my work, but I think maybe some people will do that just naturally too.
And then there's some who are like, notes? What are they? Checklists? I don't have a checklist. I need a checklist to keep track of my checklist. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I ended up making things that work for me. I used to have a huge checklist, and then it was just, well, I'm never going to get through that between a session. So what's the focus key ones that I want to check? And then just there's some you check at the end of the day, and there's some you check between sessions. So.
Yeah. Before we get to the big question that I always ask is, what is your speed secret? But before, I also know that you have an old Datsun 240. For you, I'll say Z. For you and me, it's a 240Z. For Americans, it's a 240Z. But what state is it in? Well, not in the way of California. I know it's in California, but what condition is it in? What are you doing with it? And where's that at?
Yeah, so that's a fun project. It runs. It's still running. It probably spends more time in the garage than it does outside. Unfortunately, I think, I had it before I started racing, and since racing, racing takes more time than it does. But I've been working on an engine build for multiple years, mostly because I wanted to learn about engine building, as a just a new skill to learn. I like doing things with my hands, and in my day job, I don't do that a lot anymore. So it's kind of like a, I don't know, mental relief or relaxation through frustration,
Yeah.
whatever you'd like to call it.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I've been working on an engine build there, and I've been documenting that as I go. My wife often says to me, "Why don't you just finish it or whatever?" I'm like, "Well, I started documenting, and so the documenting takes me 2 to 3 times longer than it takes me to do the actual things." So, but
And then once you have it done, then what? I mean, so you might as well keep dragging it out, right?
yeah, so yeah, that probably needs some more love right now. So I've been trying to spend a little bit of time here and there to work on that. Sometimes though, it's too long between things, so I keep notes, but I have to go back and try and remember where I was at and things like that. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, I would eventually like to get that back out on track. So I started doing track days in that car, and then quickly realized, like, well, if I really like this car, I probably shouldn't be putting it out on track. So with my driving skills, and then now that I'm getting more car control, I'd like to take it back out and try. It's really it's a cool, fun car to me. I've done a lot of things in the car, and so I'd like to take it back out on track and stuff. So eventually, I'll finish this motor. So I originally started building the motor because the old motor started to get tired on track days and was starting to smoke a little bit. So, and then then I went racing, and then I didn't have time anymore. So
Right.
yeah. So, but no, it's fun. Lots of little things to do. There's always something to do on that car. But yeah, I try to keep it running so I can always move it around and take it out once in a while. And I really like enjoying it. It's a very different feeling than driving the daily driver and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. Hey, one thing I actually forgot to ask you, but one of the things that I've seen you do better than I'd say most club racers is you do a great job with sponsors. You have sponsors, and more importantly, you look after your sponsors. You give them value. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that? And maybe here's a chance to plug them a little bit. But just how have you approached that part of it? I guess the business side of your racing.
Yeah, so I learned early on how expensive racing was. Like fixing the car after a couple of smashes, or Spec Racer Ford, that your first season out, you're probably going to go through a front radiator or two. So I quickly learned, it's not cheap to go racing. So I kind of worked out, well, what would be a way for me to offset some of those costs, and so partnerships and sponsorships were a way of doing that. I don't know. I think, the key to any partnership or sponsorship is, how can you help them? Mm-hmm. That's, if I was to give my sponsorship speed secret, that's, always look from the point of how you can help them. So it doesn't matter what it costs you to do. It doesn't matter what you need to go racing. It's how are you going to help them, And so I've been able to work out, I worked with a good friend of ours, Brian Bonner, on one of his early programs about sponsorship and learned from him, which is fantastic. And then I've grown my program from there. So I always try and, provide value back to partners. I've been lucky. I've had some really good support, both from media partners and parts partners and car partners. I mentioned the seat, Yeah. So I got a seat foam kit to put in the car, and in return they got an instructional video on how to pour foam seats. Wow. Value add for me, and they didn't have to pay a production team to produce that video for them, and now they have evergreen content for doing that. And so that kind of stuff's really worked out. It's I'm not really getting rich off the sponsorship, but it's really helping to offset my costs for racing. But I've also learned a new skill. I've learned a little bit more about how the business works and how motorsports works in general. And so, that's kind of been fun for me to learn about new skills. I've had some great partners. A lot of the people that I still work with were, people that have been around for a few years, because I like to try to take care of them, So that's been working out. So, looking for the win-win and the value add. What can you bring that helps them, and what can they bring that helps you? So
Right.
that's kind of been my approach to it. Now more than ever with everything going on, support the companies and products that support racers. We have a great community of people that really make grassroots racing happen. So now's a good time to support everybody. So we've been lucky.
And you have done a great job of, you put a lot of those resources on your website, but you've also, because of that approach you've taken, you've gotten some good media coverage as well. So, which again turns around and provides value back to your sponsors, right?
Yeah, that's been great. Yeah, last year was a good year. I got featured in Autosport, which is, Auto Week.
Yeah.
And then we got some other media coverage for the region, and on podcasts like this one, and I've been on a few of them. I've had a long time podcast partner with 10 Tenths podcasts. They've been great. I've done some work with Redline Oil for helping promote their stuff at local regional events, which has been good. Red Horse Performance, we did some AN fitting videos and instructionals for that company. And so in return, they helped me out with offsetting my hoses and fittings costs, and so it's been fantastic for things like that. So really, really enjoyed it. Like talking to the people, and I often will send them race reports and updates about what's happening, and it's always good to hear back from them, and them wishing me well and things like that. So it's been fun. Learning the business side is actually really interesting.
So I was going to ask you for your speed secret, but you kind of already said it. You said something like, always look at the partner sponsors from the perspective of what you can provide them. Is that
That's a pretty good one if you're going after sponsorship and stuff. If you're trying to go fast out in the track, the little changes and the little bits of improvement add up. So don't get disheartened. I used to get disheartened about, I'm a second off. But, if you break a second down through 10 corners, you're a 10th off in every corner, or, so
yeah.
all the little things add up. They really do make a difference. So don't try and make up a second on turn one, try and make them up with a little bit less steering input, or a little bit more throttle, or could you come off the brakes just that little bit earlier to carry more corner entry speed? Those are the things that add up.
So James, how do people follow you? What's your the best way to get a hold of you and follow you and see what's going on and access your resources?
KangaMotorsports.com. So Kanga, short for kangaroo, and then motorsports, self-explanatory. That's the website. From there, you can get to my email. You can get to most of my contact details, my social media. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter occasionally, and Facebook, of course. So reach out there. I'm always happy. I get quite a few emails from people asking questions and stuff, and so I'm always happy to help people out, because I got a lot of people that helped me out when I was first starting out too. So feel free to reach out. It's always great talking to you. It's always great talking to new racers and talking about racing in general. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate it, James. Great fun always catching up and talking about all of this stuff. And, I hope that this season works out. I know you were thinking about trying to do a little bit of, I think we talked about cross-training, trying some different things this year. And I hope that you get a chance to do some of that.
Yeah, this year was going to be my year of variety. So I was going to try and do some, budget endurance stuff, try a different car, and some regional weekends and things like that. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah. Well, good luck, and have fun out there. Keep. I was going to say keep learning, but I know that's just kind of the way you think, anyway. So, but keep having fun.
Yeah, keep having fun is key. I think if you're not having fun doing it, you probably you're like me. You won't go fast and being frustrated. So
yeah. Well, thanks for being on the show, James, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Here's a heads up for all you book lovers searching for a great read. Ross has ebooks, many of them free. They are simple, quick reads that deliver maximum learning. Topics include tuning the shocks, or for you purists, tuning the dampers. how to use mental imagery to improve your driving, tips and advice on endurance racing, how to learn a track fast, and a very cool one that's made up of illustrations that explain driving concepts and techniques. And remember, most of them are free. Go to speedsecrets.com/ebooks to download your next read. As always, keep learning and having fun.